Good morning. Welcome to the sunroom. Hope you're doing good today. This is episode 2 of Scott Bedgood's Sunroom Storytime, and I am your host, Scott Bedgood, and this is the sunroom. The birds are waking up. My dog is pushing on me, trying to get me to stop talking. It's a good morning. I loved the reaction from episode 1. It was a lot of fun to put that out. I appreciate everybody that commented, everybody that listened, everybody that subscribed and did all of those things. Please do that if you haven't done that already. It's a huge deal, especially early on, to get that reaction and get that nice algorithm juice to keep this thing going. Because I'm putting in a lot of effort, and I don't want to talk about working hard or anything like that, but it's something that I really care about, and I really hope that this takes off and I can keep telling stories because stories are really fun. Today we have a really good story. We have a really interesting, fun story from my life about the time that my wife and I got lost in Wales. So last week we did talk about killer whales. We talked about Free Willy. This week we're talking about whales. But I want to set up where I was sort of in life before this trip. And so I was living in Dallas with my wife. We didn't have kids yet. This was 2019. And I'd been working for this company for a couple of years that was kind of a wheels off company. And they made a lot of promises that they could not keep, including about like a lot of bonuses they said they were going to give me. They promised they would give me, and then they didn't give me. They owed me thousands and thousands of dollars. They had laid off my boss about 6 months earlier, right before he took a vacation, like the day before he took a vacation. They had laid off another person right before he took a vacation. And so this is March 2019, end of March 2019. I'm about to leave the office to head out on my vacation, and I get called into the HR director's office, and I get let go. Of course, we had to still go on the trip. It was all paid for. But that was the background. It was just like I had this incredible trip I'd spent a long time planning, but a lot of the trip I was worried about what was going to happen with my job. It was an amazing trip with a lot of great memories, but by far the best memory was being lost in the very dark, very remote village of Llanberis. And yes, that is Llanberis, Llanberis. So let's get into it. This is your second sunroom story. I love almost everything there is to love about traveling. I love the planning of a trip. I love thinking about where I could go. I love putting all the pieces together to make a unique, interesting trip. I love learning about the culture I'm going to, the language. I love just doing all the research. And then, of course, I love, once I'm there, all the fun that you have that you don't plan. It's all my favorite. I don't love flying in an airplane, getting through security, all of that. Other than that, I'm all about travel. I think it's probably in my blood. My dad owned a travel agency growing up, and so we traveled a lot, and we did a lot of trip planning, and we went to interesting, unique places. And so when I got married, my wife and I, that was a big priority of ours, was to be able to travel. And so we didn't have kids for the first 5 years of our marriage. And so we spent a lot of that time traveling. And we went to Iceland 3 times. And then after 3 years in a row in Iceland, we thought we should do one more big European vacation before we, have kids. And so we started planning out this trip to Ireland, because flights to Dublin were really cheap, to Ireland, and then Wales, and then Liverpool. And each of those places had some kind of personal significance to me. Ireland, I've got Irish roots like every white person, but also I really loved Irish music from U2 all the way to more modern musicians like Lisa Hannigan and people like that. But more than any of them was a guy named Glenn Hansard, who had a band called The Frames that was really huge in Ireland in the 90s and the 2000s. And then he started a movie called Once, which won an Oscar for the song Falling Slowly with Marketa Irglova. And I've been a huge fan of them for a long time. I listened to this album called Live at Vicar Street, which is the Frames Live at Vicar Street. I memorized every single word of that album. And so going to Ireland, there was some really cool significance there. But really going across to Wales had even more. And then Liverpool as well, because I am a huge Liverpool Football Club fan, and my great great grandfather had immigrated from Liverpool, so I have that connection to Liverpool. And so we went to a game at Anfield as part of the trip. But it was a trip that I had thought through a lot, and I wanted to make it unique. I don't ever do any tourist things. I don't ever do like group tours or stay at all inclusives or anything like that. We piece together our trips in a unique way that allows us to get away from the crowds, see unique things, kind of get in with the people and the places that we're traveling to. And so that's what we did for this trip. So we flew to Dublin. We had an amazing time there. And in fact, I told you that Glenn Hansard was a huge part of why I wanted to go to Ireland, a huge part of my life, really. And it just so happened, and I'm telling you, this is the most random, amazing turn of events. We booked this trip, and then I remember thinking, oh, I wonder if I could go see a concert at Vicar Street in Dublin, because that's the album I used to listen to, or I still do sometimes, the Frames Live at Vicar Street. And I looked, and on one of the two nights that we were in Dublin, Glenn Hansard was playing a concert there. And it's not something he does very often. I think it had been many years since he had been there, and I think maybe he's only done one or two there in the last 6 years since then. And it was one of the two nights we were going to be there. And so we got tickets. It was a magical experience for me and my wife. And Dublin was cool. And then we took a ferry across the Irish Sea to Holyhead in Wales. And I mean, even taking that ferry across was important for me, because my great great grandfather, who immigrated from Liverpool, he was heading back to Liverpool for business with his business partner, and they were on the Lusitania when it sunk. And it's an incredible story. He and his best friend / business partner, they actually gave their life belts to some people who didn't have them, and his business partner died. He survived. He was a really strong swimmer. He went down with the ship. He was able to swim up. He gets rescued. He recovers for a little bit, and then he goes back out and he's rowing boats to rescue other people. And he rescues a lady, and she looks at him and says, "You gave me your life belt." And it's a pretty amazing story. The survivors were brought to Liverpool, and it felt really weird, very interesting to be kind of on the waters where this happened. And you can look all that up, by the way. It's online. It's, in Lusitania survivor documentation and all that. I didn't, it's not a family lore story. It's true. And anyway, so I mean, even that was really powerful. And so we get to Wales, and this is where our trip starts to take a turn. This is where it starts to get into very odd, interesting, unique territory. So we get to Holyhead in Wales, and I'll put a map up here as I talk because it is a little bit confusing. But you have Holyhead, and that's where you land. And then what I had read was you don't need to rent a car in the UK because the bus and the train systems are so good. And that is true, apparently everywhere but Northern Wales. And I didn't know that. And I didn't want to rent a car. I didn't want to drive on the wrong side of the street or anything like that. And so we land at Holyhead. We take the train from Holyhead to Bangor. And Bangor in Wales, not Maine, but Bangor in Wales. And from Bangor, we're supposed to take a bus to Caernarfon, which is a smaller town. And then from Caernarfon, we were supposed to take a taxi or a bus or something to get to Llanberis, which was where we were going, Llanberis, which is a tiny little village at the base of Mount Snowdon. That was where we were going. I had found an Airbnb. It looked amazing. We were, it seemed possible. And it was not. So we get to Bangor, and we're waiting at the bus stop. And we're waiting for the bus. And I know that's a ZZ Top song, but it is not as cool as the song. Anyway, we're waiting there, and it's me, my wife, these two Irish teenagers, and then this girl who's she's kind of standing along the wall, and she's almost like plucked out of a BBC series about like pre-World War II Wales or something like that. She's wearing like a long gray tweed trench coat. And she's got a piece of vintage luggage that has like, like softer material on the outside of it. It looked really heavy and uncomfortable to carry, but she's clearly committed to a whole aesthetic that I just, it was very fascinating. And we go up to her and we were like, do you know if this bus is coming? Because we'd been waiting for a long time. And she was like, no, I'm wondering the same thing. And we start talking to her, and we find out her name is Ket. Ket, which she spelled it as C-E with a little hat on top, T, Ket. Very Welsh name. And if you don't know anything about Wales, Wales is a country inside the United Kingdom on the west side of the island of Great Britain. And in Wales, they speak a language called Welsh. Now, everybody speaks English. And in southern Wales, less people even speak Welsh. But in northern Wales, Welsh is the first language of everyone there. And whenever I go anywhere, I try to learn the language. And so in Iceland, I learned Icelandic, even though everybody speaks English. In Wales, I try to learn some Welsh. It's very, very difficult language. But I'm still fascinated by it. It was fascinating watching teenagers speaking Welsh to each other instead of English, even though they also spoke English. But anyway, Kiet, she was just this fascinating character. Her father was a Gaelic scholar, and so she also spoke Irish Gaelic. She spoke Welsh. She spoke English, but she also had no idea when the bus was coming. And so eventually we realized like this bus is not coming. And we've got a long journey to go beyond Caernarfon. We've got to go to Clonberis. And so we finally, our phones are not working. So she calls a van, and it was like a taxi van. And so this taxi van takes us all to Caernarfon. It's about a 30-45 minute drive, and we're getting to know Kiet. And I remember asking Kiet, I said, hey, I try to learn a little bit of Welsh, but like tell me a phrase that would be helpful if I needed to know some Welsh, because I knew like sotchi, which is like hello, or like how's it going. And she said, oh, you could say dwi y wedi blino, dwi y wedi blino. And I was like, what's that mean? She goes, it means I'm tired. And I was like, that is a really strange phrase to teach someone. Right? Like if I was teaching someone a few English phrases to learn, I would not have taught them I'm tired. But she seemed to think that I would need that. So we get to Caernarfon, and we don't have any way to get to Clonberis, and we're like, we're lost, right? This is a tiny town. There's not like a cab service that's easy to hail down. Uber was, not really even a thought in 2019 in this town. So we go into a restaurant and we try to see if we can use their phone to call a cab. And they're a little hesitant, but they're willing to let us do it. And then right as we're about to call the cab, Kiet like opens the door and she goes, I got you a taxi. We're like, oh, okay. And he said he'll take you to Clonberis. The problem is this taxi only took cash. Now, if you don't know the difference between the parts of the UK and Ireland, let me give you a brief breakdown. Ireland, Dublin, is in the Republic of Ireland, which is an independent sovereign country in the European Union. Wales is part of the United Kingdom, which is not part of the European Union, although they sort of were at this time. But they use, in Ireland, they use the euro. In the United Kingdom, they use the pound. We had just come over from Ireland and had not had any time to exchange currency. So we had euros, which he wouldn't accept. and we did not have pounds. So we had to go find the one ATM that was open at 9 p.m. at night. And we go up to it, and we're going to have to just accept whatever the fee is, to use our debit card in a foreign country. But as I'm walking up, I'm realizing I haven't used my debit card in a long time. I never use my debit card. I use my credit card to pay it off. It's fine. So I don't know if my debit card's expired, and I definitely don't know if I know my PIN number. So we're walking up, pitch dark. This cabbie's waiting on us. I do my debit card, put in the PIN code. It's wrong. Try it one more time, put in the PIN number. It works. Pull out the cash. We go to him, and he goes, "You're going to Clonbarris?" And we're like, "Yes." And he goes, "Okay." And in the Airbnb I had booked was this really unique cabin situation on a farm. And so to get there, the directions were really specific. There was no way to punch in an address. I had to tell him, you go to this hotel in Clonbarris, and then you turn right and you go under a bridge and you drive for about a mile, and then you'll see a farm, and you turn right into the farm. You go up this hill, down this other hill, up this other hill, and then you're at the cabin. So I tell him, yeah, so can you get us to this hotel, and then I'll give you the instructions after that. And he goes, yeah, I can do that. So we get in his cab, and immediately when we close the door, we realize this man's cab smells like a baby diaper. Like a baby's diaper was in the car. Smelled like a baby diaper. We were stuck in it for about 30 minutes in the pitch dark in the middle of Wales. Nobody around. No one would have known if he'd have murdered us and thrown us into a bog. It was like something that happens in a BBC crime show, except for the fact that there was also a smell of baby diapers in this guy's car. So he gets us to Carnarvon, and we go to the hotel, and I was like, okay, cool. So now we're going to take a right. He goes, you told me to take you to the hotel, and this is the hotel. And he gets out of his car, and he goes to the back, and he gets our luggage out. And we had two big suitcases, rolly suitcases. Gets the luggage out and asks for the money, takes the money and leaves. So now we're at this hotel, and we're over a mile through the village of Clonbarris, and we have to figure out how to get to our cabin. So we start walking, and we walk through the dark, empty streets of this village in Wales, and we go under the bridge. We're making so much noise, probably waking up the entire village with our rolly suitcases. And we're looking, and we walk, and we walk, and we walk over a mile. And then we get to an entrance of farmland, and we're like, I guess this is it. We go in, and we go up this hill, and we're dragging the suitcases up this hill. I mean, we're exhausted, but there's no choice. I mean, we've got to get to the cabin at this point. We go down this other hill, we go up another hill, and then finally we're like, I don't think this is it. So we keep going, and then we realize we've gotten to the main house. So we turn back around and go down the hill, and we finally go up. We finally get to our cabin. It was 10 p.m. We get to our cabin, and we haven't had any dinner. And so the only food we had was snacks we had bought at Buc-ee's on the way to the airport. And so we ate our Buc-ee's snacks at a cabin in the middle of nowhere, Wales, for dinner. And I was just sitting there, and I was just like, man, dwi a wedi blano. I was tired. Kiet was right. When we woke up the next morning and had to walk the path that we had walked in the middle of the night in the pitch dark, we realized we had just walked through the creepiest scene of all time. Everything was these gnarled 1,000-year-old trees covered in moss, and we had no idea. We were so locked in on just getting to the cabin, we didn't even take time to, use a flashlight and look around. If we had, I think we might have just died, because it was the creepiest place in the world. But Wales was unbelievable country. One of my favorite places I've ever been. We hiked to the top of Mount Snowdon, which is the tallest mountain in the UK besides those in Scotland. And to be fair, it's not that tall compared to like American mountains or mountains elsewhere. But you're starting at what I think is basically sea level, and you walk up like 3,000 feet or something like that. It was an all day hike. It was easy but like long and kind of strenuous, but it was really really fun. And I remember walking down and just thinking about how amazing the trip had been so far and just what an amazing experience. I mean, there's just sheep like in the fields next to you as you're hiking. It's just so peaceful. It's so amazing. You have no cell service. It's just like this peaceful, incredible time and place. So you get towards the bottom and my phone picks up cell service and I get a phone call, but I don't answer it because I can't, it's not great service, but it goes to voicemail. And I listen to the voicemail and it was the HR director from the job that had just fired me before this trip. Remember, I talked about that in this morning's introduction. The HR director from the job that had just fired me. And he was wondering if I could give them the social media passwords for all the accounts from the company because that was part of my job, was running those accounts. And I got to the bottom. We went to a cafe. I got I think it was some kind of like honey cake because we just burned like 3,000 calories and we're like, let's get some cake. And I'm sitting there with the cake and I'm like, yeah, I'm feeling pretty good right now. And I sent him an email and I said, hey, it was so good to hear from you while I'm on my now unpaid time off. I was actually coming down a mountain and I got that phone call from you. And wow, that was wonderful to get that. I would like to let you know that you should have thought about getting the passwords to the social media accounts before you fired me, right before I took this vacation, or asked me for them while I was in the office. But as it is, I am on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, and you can Google how to recover passwords in this situation. Please never contact me again unless it's about all the money your company owes me. Diolch. That's thank you in Welsh. Yeah, it was pretty wild. And I did not really embellish any of that email, except I didn't say Diolch for this podcast. That's what happened. And yeah, guess what? He didn't contact me again, and I didn't get any of that money. But the trip was incredible. We did end up going to the Liverpool game in Anfield. Liverpool was incredible. We went to the Lusitania Museum, got to see a lot of stuff just about what my great-great-grandfather went through with the wreck of the Lusitania. And then we went to the Liverpool game. They played Chelsea. It was a 2-0 win by Liverpool. It was the game where Mohamed Salah scored that really far outside the box, just missile from the right wing. Scored that one that they're actually playing everywhere right now because Salah just announced he's leaving Liverpool at the end of the season. And I'm heartbroken and I don't really want to talk about that. But at least I got to see what may have been his best goal ever. And it was the angle I had was like right behind it. So the second he kicked it, I knew it was in. And it was the most intense, unbelievable sporting event I've ever been to. Just the pure like passion and intensity of the crowd was everything I'd ever wanted. And the trip was everything I had ever wanted in a trip like that. And I think about it all the time. But my favorite thing about trips is when things that are unplanned happen. And getting lost in Wales that day, even though it was really stressful, it was such a memorable experience. We met interesting people. We saw parts of the country that we probably would not have seen. And we experienced the kindness of strangers, even strangers whose cabs smell like baby diapers, took us to the wrong location and made us pay them in cash. So that's your second sunroom story. Okay, it's time for everybody's favorite segment, which is Wiki Wonderings. And today we're getting into a pretty interesting topic. It is, what is the caning of Charles Sumner? Okay, so I'm not trying to be political at all. I don't want to ever make this a political show or whatever, but I did stumble on this because of a political thing. There was the hearing to approve Mark Wayne Mullen as the DHS secretary, and there was this exchange between him and Rand Paul about like political violence, and Rand Paul referenced the caning of Charles Sumner, and I thought, I don't know what that is. And I'll be honest with you, when I hear caning, I think of like getting hit sort of with like bamboo poles, or like I don't think of like a deeply violent attack. And boy, this was violent. So let's get into this wiki wondering, which is, what is the caning of Charles Sumner? Okay, so I'm gonna have to fast forward through a lot of this, even though it's Wikipedia. Even the Wikipedia page is very detailed. Some of the stuff is still like, I guess, hot button issues for people, but there's a clear right and wrong here. So I'm not like gonna be afraid to take a stand on who did the right thing and who did the wrong thing. But the two main characters we have are Representative Preston Brooks, a pro-slavery Democrat from South Carolina, and Senator Charles Sumner, an abolitionist Republican from Massachusetts. Okay, so this is 1859, right before the Civil War. Many people will say this is like a representative of what the United States was like at this time. Just the resorting to violence to try to handle this issue. It had become so hot button that it just violence became normalized. But Charles Sumner had given a speech in the chambers in Congress, and he had used a lot of inflammatory language to accuse one of Preston Brooks's cousins of basically just he was just talking about how this pro-slavery person, he was using language that was very like sexualized, and he was very much kind of like using slavery as like a harlot, and just basically saying like, you've given yourself over to this whore, essentially. And this very much offended Preston Brooks, this other guy's cousin, and as was the intention. Sumner was attempting to offend people, but he was like, I would like to offend people who are defending slavery, and it worked. He very much offended them, and so Preston Brooks gets really upset, and he's like, I'm going to take care of this, and he recruits some friends. A couple days later, he walks up to Charles Sumner, who's sitting at his desk, and he just starts absolutely bludgeoning him with a cane, and not like a bamboo pole, a thick cane with a heavy metal piece on the end of it. And he's bludgeoning this man who did not really have a chance to defend himself at all. He's just beating him and beating him and beating him. And some other people try to stop this. They try to jump in and stop it, but they can't, because the two guys he had recruited, these other political figures, they one is holding a gun on everybody else. The other one's kind of pushing people away, but he's holding a gun, pointing a gun at people, saying like, if you intervene, I'll kill you. So he's just beating this guy. Sumner finally is able to get up, but Brooks chases him, beats him even more, hits him over the head, hits him over the body. Debilitating injuries for Sumner. It takes Sumner 2 years to recover from the injuries, and he never fully recovered. I mean, he was hurt for the rest of his life because of these injuries inflicted on him by another politician, not even the one he insulted, by the way. But the aftermath of this incident is what's more interesting. I mean, if Brooks had just been arrested, put in prison for a violent assault, then that might have been, we probably wouldn't know anything about this or remember this. But instead, what really happened was that Brooks was arrested and fined $300, which was equivalent to about $10,000 today. So no prison sentence, just a fine for nearly killing another man. But he also becomes a hero in the South. In fact, pieces of his cane that had been broken because he'd beaten this man so violently were distributed as artifacts, as prizes throughout the South. The South lionized him. They said Sumner was faking his injuries. Meanwhile, Sumner became a martyr in the North. And this was one of the inspirations for John Brown to begin taking his actions in Kansas. Brooks actually resigned his position, but then ran for re-election, and they re-elected him resoundingly. Sumner was so injured he could not return to the Senate for 2 years, and Massachusetts, in protest, refused to send a replacement. They said, you have to look at his empty seat. until he comes back, because you need to know what happened. And it becomes this rallying cry for both sides, where the South says, yeah, hey, that's what we got to do to handle these people. And the North says, look how crazy these people are. And whatever you think of the South and the North, this one's pretty clear who's in the right. Okay, the guy who got beaten almost to death with a cane is not the guy in the wrong, but that's not how it was seen in the South. And that is what Rand Paul was referencing when he was talking to Mark Wayne Mullen about political violence. He was making very clear that this is not something we want to return to. This was not okay. And this is not a fun relic of the past. This was well after dueling was even allowed. Dueling had been ruled out. But somebody did goad Preston Brooks into a duel and said, let's go to Canada. We'll go to Canada and we'll duel it out, because I'm gonna kill you for what you've done. Brooks accepted and then was like, oh, I can't make it to Canada. Seems pretty on point for that fella. And so, not a fun wiki wondering, but a really interesting one. And that is, what is the caning of Charles Sumner? Okay, so for this quick segment, I did want to make a book recommendation. It's called Blood and Treasure by Bob Drury and Tom Clavin. And it is about Daniel Boone and the fight for America's first frontier. I love history. I love American history. I love history of the West. I love Native American history. I've actually read another book by Drury and Clavin called The Heart of Everything That Is, which is about the Sioux chief Red Cloud, which is probably maybe my favorite book, especially in this genre. But I didn't know anything about Daniel Boone, and I knew he wore coonskin cap, and by the way, he didn't. But I didn't really know what he did, why he was famous, and this was really a fascinating book. However, it might be the most violent book I've ever read, and I've read lots of violent historical books, and this one, as one of my friends said who had read the book, said it feels like they revel in the violence a little bit. Just some details where I'm like, I had to put the book down a few times because it is deeply violent. And I think that there is a reason for that. It needs to be in there because you need to understand what it was like fighting for the land that we all live on. I mean, I'm wearing a shirt that says Appalachian Mountains right now. The Appalachian Mountains were America's first frontier. That was as far west as the European settlers really could go because of the Indian tribes there. And the fighting for that land was unbelievably violent by both sides. Both sides were absolutely savage, barbaric people fighting for land. And it is a fascinating book. It makes you appreciate, well, one, just the civilized society we live in today, but just how much people were willing on both sides and all the different tribes of the Native Americans, but and then on the European side, just how much people were willing to sacrifice for the land that we live on. It's really, really, really interesting, and I highly recommend it if you don't have a very sensitive sensibility when it comes to violence in a book. I would, if they made a movie out of this, I wouldn't watch it. I'll say that. But reading it, it was like, okay. But if they made a movie out of it and kept it accurate, I would not be able to watch it because it is. But highly recommend the book. And speaking of Kentucky, when you're listening to this, I will have just gotten back from Kentucky. I was in Kentucky on Friday. I was in St. Louis on Saturday. First time I've ever been to Kentucky. Hopefully it's as magical as Daniel Boone made it sound. I hope also that it's a lot less violent than Daniel Boone experienced. But I will talk about that next week on next week's podcast because as of recording right now, I have not been there yet. And then I will, when I have other upcoming shows, I'll put them on here. But right now I have a little bit of a break. We're going back to Texas for Easter and have a lot of stuff going on in April. But for now, please like, please subscribe, please comment. Tell me, you have any stories where you've been lost on a trip? Do you have any really interesting, fascinating travel tales? Shoot them my way. Send me an email, scott@bedgoodmarketing.com. Put them in the comments on YouTube. Please, like I said, continue to like and subscribe. Please share this with somebody who you like to travel with, or who you think would appreciate this story. I This has been really fun. The reactions to the first episode were really great. It was very encouraging, made me want to do more, and that's what I'm doing. And I'll be back next week with another interesting story. Hopefully it's an interesting story from something that happened on the road with Dusty Slay this weekend. And if not, I have so many other fun, interesting stories in the hopper, and I'll tell one of those, and we'll keep this thing rolling. But this has been episode 2 of Sunroom Storytime.